Kundalini represents the progressive phase of individuation, because Shakti herself here is responsible for that individuation in the first place. So it is that mutual process of correlation, if our individuality is a result of Shakti's convergence into such a way that the possibility for the dynamics of this experience become actuality, then in a likewise manner, it is released in the same way that the individuality is then known for what it is, and therefore a reference point of individual vanishes as a vantage point, you see? And you would not know at what point it vanished as a point. And that is what I argue is when we enter the true measure of our individuality. Ishta Devata in relation to SAMAVESHA. It's from Bart. Again, the background. In one of your videos, you talk about these divine aspects of Shaktis being at the base of our personalities. In a way, I could look at this as if human beings are inherently possessed by different forms of the goddess. I'm wondering how these energies are functioning in the one who is not spiritually aware versus in the one who is undergoing Kundalini awakening. What happens to our individuality with regard to these divine aspects when we progress on this pathless path, deeper into ourselves? And what does it mean for the one in whom the Kundalini process is completed? This feels relevant to me since the immersion in Poland, where I had an image of a particular form of the goddess appear before my eyes on the last day, exactly when you were talking about Ishta Devata. Since then, I've had a handful of noteworthy experiences relating to her, and she has become part of my sadhana, not to mention the impact this has had on me. And there are 3 questions in relation to that. How do these divine aspects or Shaktis function in those who are not spiritually aware versus those undergoing Kundalini awakening? What happens to our individuality in relation to these divine aspects as we progress deeper into ourselves on this pathless path? And finally, what does it mean for someone when the Kundalini process is completed? Okay. Ultimately, it doesn't matter whether one is awakened or not in terms of the expressive potentiality of what Shakti represents here. So this is very clear. Because it is not individual who realizes his or her divine essence. This has to be brought to your awareness over and over and over. The conversation may be and could be unfold from that level because it belongs to that level. But one should always implement highest understanding and then give concessions. So from that point of view, really awakening itself is seen in a very different light, in a very different way. At first, it is always owned as one's own and always spoken in relation to as one's own, almost as if objectified. In fact, it is objectified because it's still at that level. But with time, or with short time, it depends on the intensity, this undergoes complete and utter transformation. And one cannot speak about this anymore. Nor can one think about this anymore in terms of one's awakening, one's process, and so forth. And that, of course, also in turn measured to the degree of the way Kundalini as a process unfolds. So in other words, it can only be known if it is radically and very, very powerful in its display. Then one would have, as it were, a point of departure. One would have a distinctive moment, like a kind of complete and utter obliteration. It's not easy, therefore, if you remember, I always emphasize that one's endocrine system, one's psychological strength has to be, one's ahamkara has to be at such level of development that this will not result in potential deterioration, because it will be very difficult to reassemble that, as it will require to be reassembled when the rewiring process begins. But in most cases, thankfully and hopefully, it is more of a progressive, that krama aspect here, stagely, phasely, progressive. And in that manner, one would not even know exactly when that transition takes place. So that process of Kundalini completion is, as it were, it's like you don't know when you are no longer a river and you are an ocean. Just like that moment of flowing into. You see that there are some waters that are kind of like distinctively coming from the river. Maybe the aerial photograph, aerial view, what have you, will show even some different color of the streams. Maybe water is colored from the soil of the embankment where the river flow. But as it begins to merge with the waters of the sea, it will be more and more difficult to tell which waters come from the river and which belongs to the sea. You see? So this moment, that confluence, that moment of inflow, is what here is we're speaking about in relation to completion of the Kundalini process. So whether individuality here is seen for what it is again at the level which is always with reference to the self. It will reveal itself in perhaps minute detail, minute aspects, or it may be a much broader perspective, much broader picture. You see? It depends on where the attention and where the focus of consciousness will fall. So the individuality here, this is as a reminder again, individuality is taken for granted. So we, as it were, already speak about here being an individual as if being an individual, whereas in fact, Kundalini represents the progressive phase of individuation, because Shakti herself here responsible for that individuation in the first place. So it is that mutual process of correlation, if our individuality is a result of Shakti's convergence into such a way that the possibility for the dynamics of this experience become actuality, then in a likewise manner, it is released in the same way that the individuality is then known for what it is, and therefore a reference point of individual vanishes as a vantage point, you see? And you would not know at what point it vanished as a point. And that is what I argue is when we enter the true measure of our individuality. Because to begin with, if we are to take the philosophy of Trikashaivism, as it has been dubbed as the greatest secret, or the best kept secret of India, right? The secret supreme is that individuality is the Shiva's relationship with itself. So individuality here is never spoken exclusively from the point of view of individual. Concession to the language, concession to the way, and that's what makes the application of upayas so helpful, unique, and practical. So that there exists this individual level of methodological application. And then there is Shaktupaya, the empowered means, and then there is Shambhavupaya, the divine means, until there are no means, and that is the pathless path, actionless action. So, perhaps this will suffice for now, and of course we will return to this as many times as it is required. Particularly so that we don't also end up with the understanding, that kind of intellectual, mental understanding, mental picture of I'm divine in my attributes, in my essence, and that's what I am, and that's it. Nothing can be done about it, nothing needs to be done anything about that. And yet, unless this becomes the deepest knowing, which is not at the level of the mind anymore. In fact, it cannot be at the level of the mind to begin with. Because if it is at the level of the mind, then it still belongs to that individual level, because it's only individual level that allows the mind for its existence and legitimizes that mind's existence. Whenever taken beyond, it, as it were, dissolves the boundary of individual there and then. And of course, all of us come in and out of that. We don't know demarcation line. So in other words, when that is dissolved, we don't know it, because there is no demarcation line to know, oh, I'm individual, now experiencing unity. Or I'm individual, now experiencing celestial state of that perception. You see? This is why that understanding is spoken of as the first step equals to the last step, because Shiva is Jiva, Jiva is Shiva. So this relationship is all there is. This is the dynamic. This is where it is being recognized, reclaimed. So, and the rest, of course, is good. Yes, that connection to that relationship, that communion with Ishta Devata, often steadfast and beautifully embowels that. It brings that reassurance. And it can be experienced in a variety of ways, not necessarily always through the iconography, through imagery. It can be experienced in a way which is not definable easily in language. In other words, not always in pictorial terms. It can be experienced in a sense of presence, sheer presence. It can be experienced as manifestation of power, extraordinary power. It can be experienced in a sense of spaciousness, being completely and utterly everywhere at once. So it's not only true to the experience of pictorial representation. So this is very important also to understand.